The stars were dying and nobody knew how to stop it. Commander Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, staring at the message that had arrived 3 hours ago. It was written in 12 different languages, all begging for the same thing: help. The Galactic Council needed Earth, and that alone told him how bad things had become. Earth had been sending signals into space for 200 years. For most of that time, nobody answered. Then 50 years ago, the Council finally responded. Their message was simple and cold. Earth was too primitive to join them. Humanity should stay quiet and stay home. The galaxy had no use for a species that still used chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. Now everything had changed. The Council was desperate, and desperate people called anyone who might answer. Kyle read the message again. An enemy called the Void Swarm was destroying everything in its path. It had already consumed 17 star systems. Billions of aliens were dead. The Council's most powerful civilizations had thrown their best weapons at the swarm and nothing worked. Every fleet they sent came back smaller, if it came back at all. The Velthara were crystalline beings who could manipulate light itself. Their weapons could turn stars into bombs. The swarm ate through them like they were nothing. The Kickstar were telepaths who could link thousands of minds into one perfect tactical network. The swarm didn't have a mind to read or confuse. The Drayan had technology so advanced they could fold space and move planets. None of it mattered. Kyle looked at his second officer, Lieutenant Amy Brooks. She was young, only 26, but she had sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What do you think?" he asked. Amy didn't hesitate. "I think they're asking us because everyone else is already dead, sir." She was probably right. Kyle had spent 3 years as Earth's representative to the outer colonies, and he knew how the galaxy saw humanity. They thought humans were barely civilized. Too violent, too unpredictable, too proud. Earth had built a dozen warships and thought that made them ready for the stars. The Council had thousands of ships, each one more advanced than anything Earth could build. But now those thousands of ships were losing. Captain Lisa Martinez commanded the ESS Valiant, the flagship of Earth's defense fleet. She was 34 years old and had spent half her life in space. When the call came from Earth Command, she didn't ask questions. She just gathered her crew and prepared to jump. 12 ships total. That was all Earth could spare. The Valiant was the biggest, a heavy cruiser with enough weapons to level a small moon. The others were destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. Together, they carried 3,000 people who had volunteered to fly into the unknown and probably die there. Lisa walked through the Valiant's corridors and saw the faces of her crew. Some were scared. Some were excited. Most just looked determined. They knew what they were getting into. Earth Command hadn't lied to them. This was a suicide mission dressed up as a rescue operation. Chief Engineer Dan Cooper caught up with her near the engine room. Dan was 42, built like a tank, and could fix anything with enough time and coffee. "We're ready to jump, Captain," he said. "But I've been looking at the data the Council sent us. Their ships are centuries ahead of ours. If their weapons don't work, what makes them think ours will?" Lisa had asked herself the same question 100 times. Maybe they don't think our weapons will work. Maybe they just want to see if we'll fight differently. Dan nodded slowly. Or maybe they want to see if we're dumb enough to die for them. Maybe, Lisa agreed. But if we don't go, that swarm will eventually reach Earth. Better to face it now while we have allies. The jump took 6 hours. When the 12 human ships emerged from the gate near the Orion Nebula, the first thing they saw was the graveyard. Thousands of ships floated dead in space. Some were intact but dark. Others were torn apart, their hulls ripped open like paper. The debris field stretched for millions of kilometers. Kyle watched from his command chair as the sensor readings came in. No life signs, no power signatures. Nothing but metal and silence. "My God," Amy whispered beside him. "How many ships are out there?" "At least 4,000, the sensor operator reported. "Could be twice that. Most of them are Drayan and Velthara design. Some I don't recognize." A transmission crackled through. "Human vessels. This is Admiral Zethrak of the Drayan Defense Command. Follow my coordinates to the rally point. And stay close. The swarm patrols this area." The rally point was a massive station hidden behind a collapsed moon. When the human ships docked, Kyle and Lisa were escorted to a command center that looked like it had seen better days. Walls were scorched. Equipment was patched together. The few aliens they saw looked exhausted. Admiral Zethrak was a Drayan. which meant he looked like a 7-foot-tall insect with 4 arms and compound eyes. His translator made his voice sound hollow and tired. "Welcome to the last line of defense. You came. I didn't think you would. We got your message," Kyle said. "Tell us what we're facing." Zethrak activated a hologram. It showed a dark cloud spreading across star systems like ink in water. "The Void Swarm. We don't know where it came from. It appeared 3 years ago at the edge of the galaxy. At first we thought it was just a natural phenomenon. By the time we realized it was alive, it had consumed 5 systems." Lisa studied the hologram. "What is it?" "We don't know. It's not organic in any way we understand. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't negotiate. It just consumes. Ships, stations, planets. Anything with energy." "And your weapons don't work?" Dan asked. "Our weapons feed it," a new voice said. A Velthara priest named Eshtar stepped forward. She looked like a walking crystal sculpture, her body glowing with soft blue light. "We tried everything. Plasma cannons make it stronger. Antimatter bombs barely slow it. The more energy we use, the faster it adapts and grows." Kyle exchanged looks with Lisa. "So you want us to try because our weapons are more primitive?" "We want you to try because you're crazy enough to fight something you can't understand," Zethrak said bluntly. "Every civilization in this galaxy has rules, protocols. We analyze threats and develop counters. You humans, you just charge in and hope something works. Maybe that's what we need now." Lisa felt anger flash through her, but she pushed it down. Zethrak wasn't trying to insult them. He was desperate, and desperation made people honest. "Show us your battle reports," she said. "Everything. Every engagement, every tactic you tried, every failure. We need to see it all." They spent the next 12 hours reviewing data. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The swarm moved like a living thing because it was a living thing. Millions of small creatures working together as one. Each creature could absorb energy and adapt to threats. They moved through space without ships or engines, somehow propelling themselves faster than light. When the Council attacked with energy weapons, the swarm consumed the energy and grew. When they tried kinetic weapons, the swarm adapted its armor. When they tried to outmaneuver it, the swarm predicted their moves and cut them off. It was like fighting an enemy that learned from every mistake you made. Dan studied the engineering reports and saw the pattern. They're thinking like engineers, trying to find the perfect counter. But this thing doesn't care about perfect. It just overwhelms you with numbers. "So what do we do?" Amy asked. Lisa leaned back and closed her eyes. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in Earth's last global war. He always said the same thing. When you face an enemy that's smarter and stronger, you don't try to be smarter or stronger. You be meaner. She opened her eyes. "We stop thinking like the Council. We think like humans." Kyle understood immediately. "We go primitive." "Exactly," Lisa said. "The swarm adapts to advanced weapons. Fine. We won't use advanced weapons. We strip our ships down to basics. Railguns, missiles, explosives. Things so simple the swarm won't know what hit it." Zethrak's translator made a sound like laughter, but there was no humor in it. "You want to fight an extra-dimensional threat with chemical explosives? That's insane." "Yes," Lisa agreed. "It is, but we didn't come here to be smart. We came here to fight." The meeting ended with a plan that made the aliens nervous and the humans determined. They had 3 days before the swarm's next attack. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to prove that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. As Kyle walked back to his ship, he looked out at the graveyard of dead vessels floating in space. Somewhere out there the swarm was waiting. It had destroyed civilizations that had millions of years head start on humanity. But those civilizations had forgotten how to be dangerous. Humanity hadn't forgotten. They were about to remind the galaxy what monsters looked like when they fought back. The engineering bay of the ESS Valiant had never been this crowded. Human and alien technicians worked side by side, tearing apart weapon systems that had taken years to build. Dan Cooper stood in the middle of the chaos, directing traffic and making decisions that would have gotten him court-martialed a week ago. "Strip out the plasma cannons on decks 4 through 7, he ordered. "Replace them with railgun batteries. I want old-fashioned metal slugs that move fast enough to punch through anything." A Drayan engineer named Kickstal clicked his mandibles in confusion. "But railguns are obsolete. We stopped using kinetic weapons 3,000 years ago." Dan grinned. "That's exactly why we're using them now. The swarm has never seen them." Lisa Martinez watched from the catwalk above. Her ship was being transformed into something the galaxy would have laughed at a week ago. But she trusted her people. More importantly, she trusted that the Council's arrogance had blinded them to simple solutions. Kyle Morrison arrived with Admiral Zethrak. The Drayan commander looked at the work being done, and his translator emitted what sounded like a sigh. "This is madness. You're turning your ships into relics." "Maybe," Kyle said. "But relics are tough. They've survived this long because they work." Down in the fighter bay, Lieutenant Jake Henderson was having a similar conversation with his pilots. Jake was 30 years old, had sharp blue eyes, and flew like he was born in a cockpit. His squadron of 20 pilots stood around him, listening to the new mission parameters. "Forget everything you learned about energy management," Jake said. "We're going back to basics. Armor-piercing rounds, high-explosive missiles. If it makes a big boom, we're loading it." One of his wingmen, Lieutenant Sam Rivers, raised a hand. "Sir, won't that make us sitting ducks? Our fighters are designed for speed and energy weapons. We load them down with old munitions and we'll be slow." "Yep," Jake agreed. "So we'll have to be smart. Hit fast, hit hard, and get out before they know what happened. The Council's been fighting a defensive war." "We're going on offense," Sam grinned. "Now that sounds more like it." The work continued for 3 days straight. Human engineers worked with alien technicians, sharing knowledge neither side had expected to need. The Velthara taught humans how to reinforce hull plating using crystalline matrices. Humans showed the Drayan how to build mechanical backup systems that didn't rely on computer networks. Amy Brooks coordinated the tactical planning. She spread holographic maps across the command table and studied the swarm's movement patterns. The thing was predictable in some ways. It always moved toward the highest concentration of energy. It always adapted to the weapons used against it. But it had never faced an enemy that deliberately used weaker weapons. "It's like fighting a chess, Master," she explained to Lisa. "They're so used to complex strategies that they can't see the simple moves coming." Lisa nodded. "Let's hope you're right. Because if you're wrong, we're all dead." The first test came on the 4th day. The swarm sent a tendril into the Orion system, a small probe force of maybe 10,000 creatures. They moved through space like a dark cloud, each creature about the size of a car but able to change shape at will. Zethrak wanted to wait, to gather more data. Lisa overruled him. "If we wait, they'll bring more. We hit them now while we have the element of surprise." The ESS Valiant led the attack. Lisa stood on her bridge watching the view screen as they closed on the swarm. The creatures looked like living shadows, barely visible against the stars. Her weapons officer, a young man named Tony Garcia, waited for her command. "Target acquired, Captain. Railguns charged and ready." "Fire," Lisa ordered. The Valiant shuddered as its railguns opened up. Metal slugs moving at a significant fraction of light speed tore into the swarm formation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Creatures exploded into fragments. Others were knocked spinning into space. The swarm tried to adapt, tried to absorb the kinetic energy like it absorbed plasma, but it couldn't. The attack was too simple, too primitive. "They're falling back," Tony shouted, but Lisa saw something else. The swarm wasn't retreating. It was regrouping. Launch missiles. "All tubes, now!" Hundreds of missiles streaked from the human ships. These weren't sophisticated antimatter weapons. They were simple chemical explosives, the kind Earth had been using for centuries. When they hit, they created massive fireballs that ripped through the swarm formation. Zethrak watched from his command ship. His translator couldn't quite capture his amazement. "It's working. Your primitive weapons are actually working." Kyle allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The battle lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, the swarm tendril was destroyed. Fragments of creatures floated in space, their bodies unable to regenerate without the collective to support them. The human fleet had taken minor damage. One destroyer had a hull breach. 2 fighters were damaged but intact. For the first time in 3 years, the defenders had won without losing ships. The celebration was brief. Everyone knew this was just a probe force. The main swarm was still out there, millions strong and adapting even now to the new threat. But the victory proved something important. The swarm could be hurt. It could be stopped. Dan Cooper led the damage assessment. He walked through the Valiant's corridors, checking every system. The railguns had performed better than expected. The ship's mechanical backup systems had kept them fighting when computer networks went down. He found Lisa in the mess hall drinking coffee and looking exhausted. "We did it," he said, sitting across from her. "We actually hurt them. For now, Lisa replied. But they'll adapt. They always do. We need to hit them harder before they figure out a counter. So we escalate? Lisa nodded. We escalate. And we keep escalating until either we win or we run out of ideas. Jake Henderson was thinking the same thing. He gathered his pilots in the ready room and went over the battle footage. His fighters had performed well, but he saw room for improvement. The swarm creatures were fast and could change direction instantly. Energy weapons might track them automatically, but missiles required manual targeting. We need to get closer, he told his squadron. Close enough that we can't miss. Sam Rivers looked skeptical. Sir, close range means they can grab us. We saw what happened to the Drayan fighters. Those things tear ships apart. I know, Jake said quietly. But if we want to do real damage, we need to take real risks. Anyone who's not comfortable with that can transfer out. No shame in it, nobody moved. Sam eventually grinned. Guess we're all crazy then. Guess so, Jake agreed. The next attack came 2 days later. This time, the swarm sent a full assault force. 100,000 creatures moving in perfect coordination. They hit the defensive line like a tidal wave of darkness. The battle was chaos from the start. Human ships fired railguns until the barrels glowed red. Missiles streaked through space in swarms of their own. The swarm adapted quickly, forming dense clusters that could withstand the kinetic impacts. When that didn't work, they spread out, making themselves harder to hit. Lisa's tactical display showed the battle unfolding in real time. 3 sectors were being overrun. 2 council ships had already gone dark. We need to break their formation. Hit them with everything we have. Kyle's voice came through on the command channel. All ships, focus fire on Grid 7. We punched through there and split them in half. The human fleet concentrated its fire. Railguns hammered at a single point in the swarm formation. Missiles followed, creating a corridor of explosions. For a moment it looked like it would work. Then the swarm adapted again. Creatures threw themselves into the line of fire, using their bodies as shields for the others behind them. They're learning too fast, Amy warned. Dan had an idea. Captain, what if we stop being predictable? Randomize our firing patterns. Don't give them time to adapt. Lisa immediately understood. All ships, weapons free. Fire at will. Don't wait for targeting solutions. Just shoot. The coordinated attack dissolved into controlled chaos. Ships fired whenever they had a target. Missiles launched in random patterns. It was wasteful and inefficient, but it worked. The swarm couldn't adapt to unpredictability. They hesitated, confused by an enemy that didn't follow tactical doctrine. Jake saw the opening. All fighters, attack run. Follow my lead and don't stop for anything. 20 human fighters dove into the swarm formation. They flew like demons, dodging and weaving between creatures that tried to grab them. Jake's targeting computer screamed warnings, but he ignored them. He got so close to the swarm creatures he could see their surface rippling as they tried to adapt. Missiles away, he shouted. Explosions tore through the swarm from the inside. The formation collapsed into fragments. The creatures tried to regroup, but the human fleet was already hitting them with another wave of railgun fire. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the swarm had retreated. The human fleet had lost 1 ship, the destroyer ESS Ranger. 200 people had died, but they had stopped an assault that should have overwhelmed them. Lisa stood on her bridge looking at the casualty reports. 200 dead. The war had barely started and already they were bleeding. But they had proven something today. Humanity could fight. More than that, humanity could win. She opened a fleet-wide channel. This is Captain Martinez. Today The swarm learned fast. Too fast. What started as a victory turned into a grinding war of survival. Every day brought new attacks. Every attack showed that the swarm was adapting to human tactics. The creatures no longer bunched up in formations that railguns could destroy. They spread out, moved unpredictably, and attacked from multiple directions at once. Lisa Martinez hadn't slept in 36 hours. The Valiant's bridge had become her entire world. Coffee and stim pills kept her functional, but she knew she was running on borrowed time. Everyone was. Another wave incoming, Amy Brooks reported. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. Sensors count at least 50,000 creatures. They're coming from 3 vectors. Split the fleet, Lisa ordered. Group 1 takes the north approach. Group 2 handles south. We'll take the center. The battles blurred together. Fire, maneuver, retreat, regroup, and fire again. The human ships took damage faster than Dan Cooper could repair it. Hull breaches became common. Systems failed and had to be manually overridden. The engineering teams worked around the clock, grabbing sleep in shifts that never lasted more than a few hours. Kyle Morrison coordinated the defense from the command station. His hair had gone gray in the past 2 weeks. He watched as ship after ship reported critical damage. The ESS Guardian, a heavy frigate, took a direct hit that tore through its engine room. The explosion was visible across the entire fleet. "Guardian is gone," the sensor officer reported. "No survivors." Kyle closed his eyes for a moment. 300 more people dead. The list of casualties had grown so long he couldn't remember all the names anymore. That bothered him more than anything else. These weren't just numbers. They were people who trusted him to bring them home. "Send rescue ships for any survivors," he ordered, even though he knew there wouldn't be any. The swarm didn't leave survivors. It consumed everything. The Galactic Council wanted to retreat. Admiral Zethrak called an emergency meeting and made his case. "We've lost 40% of our remaining forces. At this rate, we'll have nothing left in a week. We should fall back to the inner systems and regroup." "Fall back to where?" Kyle asked. "The swarm will just follow us. Every system we abandon gives them more resources to consume. We stop them here or we don't stop them at all." Eschatar, the Velthara priest, supported the retreat. Her crystalline form looked dimmer than before, as if the war was draining her light. "Commander Morrison, your people have fought bravely, but this is not a battle you can win through courage alone. The swarm is infinite." "We are not." Lisa slammed her hand on the table. "The swarm is not infinite. Nothing is infinite. It has limits. We just haven't found them yet." "And how many more must die before you accept reality?" Zethrak demanded. The question hung in the air. Lisa didn't have an answer that would satisfy him. The truth was brutal and simple. More people would die, many more. But if they retreated, everyone would die eventually. At least here they had a chance. Dan Cooper provided that chance 2 days later. He had been analyzing the swarm's behavior patterns and found something the council had missed. "They're not random," he explained to Lisa and Kyle. "Look at the attack vectors. Every assault comes from the same general direction. They're protecting something." Lisa studied the holographic display. Dan was right. The swarm always attacked from the galactic east, never from the west. When human forces tried to scout westward, the swarm responded with overwhelming force. "What's out there?" "I don't know," Dan admitted. "But whatever it is, they really don't want us to find it." Kyle saw it immediately. The core. There's got to be a central nexus coordinating all these attacks. Destroy that and the whole swarm collapses. Amy pulled up star charts. The area they're protecting is massive. Dozens of systems. We'd need to scout each one, and the swarm would kill us before we got close. "Not if we create a big enough distraction," Lisa said slowly. An idea was forming, one that made her stomach clench with dread. "What if we make them think we're retreating? Pull the fleet back, make it look like we're beaten. While they're chasing us, a small strike force slips through and finds the core." Zethrak's translator made a sound of disbelief. "You want to use your entire fleet as bait? That's suicide." "Yes," Lisa agreed, "it is. But it's also the only plan that might work." The meeting ended with reluctant agreement. The council didn't have any better ideas, and they were desperate enough to try anything. Kyle would lead the distraction force with most of the human fleet. Lisa would take the Valiant and 3 other ships on the scouting mission. It was a long shot wrapped in a prayer, but it was something. Before they could execute the plan, disaster struck. The swarm launched its largest attack yet. 250,000 creatures hit the defensive line in a coordinated assault that overwhelmed the defenders. Alarms screamed across every ship. Weapons fired until barrels melted. Nothing was enough. The cruiser Liberty took the worst of it. Lieutenant Commander Greg Turner had assumed command after the captain died in the first week of fighting. Greg was a quiet man, not given to heroics or grand speeches. He just did his job and expected others to do theirs. When the Liberty's engines failed and the ship started drifting into the swarm, Greg made a decision. "All hands, this is the commander. Abandon ship. I repeat, abandon ship. Get to the escape pods now." His crew hesitated. Amy Brooks, monitoring from the command station, heard the transmission. "Liberty negative. We can send tugs to pull you out." "No time," Greg replied calmly. "The swarm will be on us in minutes. But this ship still has weapons and a full missile complement. I'm going to make them count." Lisa understood what he was planning. "Greg, don't. We can save you." "Maybe," Greg said. But while you're saving me, the swarm breaks through and kills thousands more. This is the better play, Captain. You know it is. He was right, and Lisa hated that he was right. She watched helplessly as the Liberty turned toward the densest part of the swarm formation. Greg had loaded every remaining weapon onto the dying ship. When he set a collision course, it became a missile weighing thousands of tons and packed with enough explosives to vaporize a moon. Greg's final transmission was simple. Tell my sister I'm sorry I'll miss her wedding. And tell Command that the Liberty died fighting. The explosion was visible from every ship in the fleet. It tore a hole through the swarm formation so large that it took the creatures nearly 10 minutes to close it. In those 10 minutes, the human fleet regrouped and counterattacked. They pushed the swarm back and held the line, but the cost was terrible. The Liberty was gone. Greg Turner was gone. 200 more names added to the list of the dead. That night, Lisa sat alone in her quarters and cried for the first time since the war started. She had sent good people to die. She would send more before this was over. The weight of command had never felt heavier. A knock on her door interrupted her grief. Dan stood outside, looking as exhausted as she felt. Thought you could use some company. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Dan spoke. Greg saved us today. His sacrifice bought us time to regroup. That means something. Does it? Lisa asked bitterly. We're still losing. Slower than before, but still losing. Maybe, Dan said. Or maybe we're just setting up for the big play. Your scouting mission. If we find that core, Greg's sacrifice will have meant everything. Lisa wiped her eyes. And if we don't find it? Then at least we went down swinging. Jake Henderson was having similar thoughts. His fighter squadron had been reduced to 15 pilots. He had started with 24. The empty chairs in the ready room haunted him. Chris Palmer, Beth Larson, Alex White, and 6 others, all gone. Sam Rivers found him staring at the squadron roster. Still thinking about the mission? Always, Jake admitted. The scouting mission would need fighter support. Lisa wanted volunteers for what everyone knew was a one-way trip. Jake had already decided to go. The question was whether to take his entire squadron or leave some behind. Take us all, Sam said, reading his mind. We're a team. We fight together or not at all. You know most of us won't make it back, Sam shrugged. Most of us won't make it back if we stay here either. At least this way we're doing something that matters. Jake looked at his friend and felt a surge of pride. These were good people. The best humanity had to offer. If they were going to die, they would die trying to save everyone else. That was the human way. Always had been. Kyle Morrison approved the mission with a heavy heart. He knew he was sending people to their deaths, but he also knew that doing nothing meant everyone died eventually. At least this way they had a chance. He recorded a message to send back to Earth. If everything went wrong, he wanted people to know what happened here. To whoever receives this, Earth's fleet came to the Orion Nebula to fight an enemy that threatened the galaxy. We fought with everything we had. Many of us died. Many more will die before this is over. But we proved something important. Humanity will never surrender. We will never stop fighting. And we will never abandon those who need our help. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us heroes. Lisa gathered her strike force the next morning. The Valiant would lead. 3 frigates would provide support. Jake's fighters would scout ahead. It was a tiny force compared to the swarm's millions, but it was fast and could move quietly. We have one job, Lisa told her people. Find the core. Once we locate it. The darkness between stars had never felt so absolute. Lisa Martinez stood on the Valiant's bridge and watched the sensor displays show nothing but empty space. They had been traveling for 3 days, moving deeper into swarm territory with every passing hour. No attacks came. No creatures appeared on their scanners. The silence was worse than any battle. This feels wrong, Amy Brooks said quietly. We should have encountered patrols by now. Dan Cooper agreed. He stood at his engineering station, monitoring every system. The Valiant was running dark, using minimal power to avoid detection. The 3 frigates following them did the same. Jake's fighter squadron flew ahead in complete radio silence, relying on tight beam lasers for communication. Maybe they don't think anyone is stupid enough to come this deep, Lisa suggested, but she didn't believe it. The swarm was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. On the 4th day, they found the first clue, a star system that had been completely stripped. Every planet was gone. Every asteroid had been consumed. Even the star itself looked different. its light dimmer as if something had been feeding on it. My God, Amy whispered. They're eating stars. Lisa felt cold fear run through her. If the swarm could consume stars, what chance did any civilization have? But she pushed the fear aside. They had a mission. Fear could wait. Jake's squadron found the next clue an hour later. His voice came through on the tight beam. Captain, you need to see this. Coordinates coming through now. Lisa brought the Valiant around. What she saw made her breath catch. Thousands of swarm creatures floating in formation around something massive. A structure that pulsed with dark energy. It looked organic, like a giant heart made of shadow and void. Tendrils of darkness spread from it in every direction, reaching across light years. That's it, Dan said with certainty. That's the core. It's coordinating the entire swarm from here. Amy ran the numbers. It's huge. 10 kilometers across at least, and the swarm creatures around it number in the millions. Can we destroy it? Lisa asked. Dan studied the sensor data. Maybe, if we hit it with enough force all at once. But we'd need to get through those millions of creatures first. And even if we do, the explosion will probably take us with it. Probably isn't definitely, Sam Rivers said. He had joined the command channel from his fighter. We've beaten worse odds. Lisa knew they hadn't, but she appreciated the optimism. She opened a channel to the other ships in her strike force. All vessels, we've found the target. Prepare to transmit coordinates to the main fleet. Once the transmission goes out, the swarm will know we're here. After that, we have one job. Keep them busy long enough for Kyle to get here with reinforcements. The frigate commanders acknowledged. They were all veterans now, people who had survived weeks of constant battle. They knew what keep them busy meant. It meant die slowly instead of quickly. Jake gathered his 15 pilots in virtual conference. Most of them were kids, barely out of their 20s. They looked at him with trust that made his heart ache. He had led so many people to their deaths already. These would probably be the last. Okay, people, here's the plan. We're going to fly straight at that core and hit it with everything we've got. Nuclear missiles, armor-piercing rounds, and one very large middle finger to an enemy that thought we'd just roll over and die. Sam grinned. Best plan I've heard all week. It's also a suicide run, Jake continued. I won't lie to you. Most of us won't make it through. Anyone wants to back out, do it now. No shame, nobody moved. A young pilot named Kevin Price spoke up. Sir, we didn't come this far to turn back now. Let's finish this, the others agreed. Jake felt pride swell in his chest. These weren't soldiers following orders. They were volunteers choosing to fight because it was the right thing to do. All right then. Let's show this swarm what humans are made of. Lisa transmitted the coordinates. Back at the Orion Nebula, Kyle Morrison received them immediately. We've got it. Prepare for emergency jump. All ships form up on the Atlas. We're going in hot. Zethrak protested. Commander, you'll be jumping blind into enemy territory. You could materialize inside a sun or a planet. Or we could save the strike force and win this war. Kyle shot back. I'm going. Anyone wants to follow, you're welcome to. Anyone wants to stay behind, I understand. Every ship in the fleet chose to follow. Even the council vessels, battered and barely functional, formed up for the jump. They had seen humans fight for weeks without surrender. Some of that stubbornness had rubbed off. Back at the core, the swarm had noticed the intruders. Creatures peeled away from their guard positions and swarmed toward the human ships. Millions of them moving with terrible purpose. Here they come, Amy announced. Impact in 90 seconds. All weapons free, Lisa ordered. Fire everything. Don't stop until we're out of ammunition or dead. The Valiant's railguns opened up. Metal slugs tore into the approaching swarm. Missiles streaked away in groups of 10, 20, 50. The frigates added their fire. Space filled with explosions and debris, but it wasn't enough. For every creature they destroyed, 10 more took its place. Jake's squadron launched. 15 fighters diving into millions of enemies. They flew like demons, weaving through the swarm with skill born of desperation. Jake armed his missiles and picked his target. Not the creatures. The core itself. All fighters target the core. Ignore everything else. This is what we came for. They dove deeper. Swarm creatures grabbed at them. Lieutenant Kevin Price was caught first. His fighter was torn apart so fast he didn't have time to scream. Then Lieutenant Sarah Mills went down. Then Commander Tony Hill. The swarm was everywhere, a living wall of death. Sam flew on Jake's wing, protecting his commander like always. We're not going to make it, boss. I know, Jake said. But we're going to get close enough first. The Valiant shuddered under repeated impacts. Swarm creatures were latching onto the hull, trying to tear through the armor. Dan diverted power to the shield generators, buying them precious seconds. Shields at 30%, 20. We're not going to last much longer. Just a little more time, Lisa pleaded. Come on, Jake, do your magic. Jake was down to 5 fighters. The others had all been destroyed in the mad dash toward the core. But those 5 had made it through. They were close now. Close enough to see the core pulsing with dark energy. Close enough to strike. Sam, you with me? Always, boss. Then let's light this thing up. All missiles, all guns, everything we've got. 5 fighters unleashed their entire payload at point-blank range. Nuclear warheads, armor-piercing rounds, chemical explosives. Everything humanity had brought to the fight. The missiles struck the core and detonated in a chain reaction that lit up the void. The core screamed. It wasn't a sound exactly. More like reality itself crying out in pain. The structure cracked, dark energy bleeding from the wounds. But it wasn't destroyed. Not yet. A swarm creature grabbed Sam's fighter. He fought the controls, trying to break free. Jake, get out of here. Complete the mission. Not without you, Jake insisted. He came around for another pass, firing his guns at the creature holding Sam. But there were too many. Another creature grabbed Sam from a different angle. His fighter's hull buckled under the pressure. Jake, listen to me, Sam said, his voice suddenly calm. Tell my mom I love her. And tell Command that we got it. We hurt the bastard. Now finish what we started. Sam's fighter exploded. The blast caught 2 nearby creatures and destroyed them too. Jake watched his best friend die and felt something break inside him. But he couldn't stop, not now. Not when they were so close. His fighter was damaged. Weapons were offline. Shields were gone. But he still had one thing left. The fighter itself. And it was full of fuel. Valiant, this is Henderson. I'm going to ram the core. Tell Earth we made it count. Jake, no, Lisa shouted. We need you. You need the swarm dead more, Jake replied. He pointed his dying fighter at the wounded core and pushed the engines to maximum. For Sam, for Chris, for everyone we've lost. The fighter accelerated. Swarm creatures tried to stop him, but they were too late. Jake Henderson slammed into the core at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact and the resulting explosion tore the structure apart from the inside. The core collapsed. The dark energy that had been holding it together dispersed into space. And across the galaxy, millions of swarm creatures suddenly went still. Without the core to coordinate them, they were just mindless drones. They drifted in space, no longer a threat. Lisa watched it happen on her view screen. They had won. The swarm was defeated, but the price had been so high. Jake was gone. His entire squadron was gone. The Valiant was barely holding together. Kyle's fleet arrived moments later, jumping into a battlefield that had gone silent. They found the core's remains and the scattered swarm creatures that no longer attacked. They found the Valiant drifting with failing engines, and they found no trace of the fighters that had made victory possible. Kyle opened a channel to Lisa. Captain Martinez, status report. Lisa's voice was hollow. Mission accomplished, Commander. The core is destroyed. The swarm is neutralized. But the strike force is gone. Jake Henderson and his squadron are gone. They gave their lives to save us all. Kyle closed his eyes. Another name for the list. More heroes who would never come home. Their sacrifice won't be forgotten. Around them, the Galactic Council ships began cleanup operations. The silence after the swarm's destruction was deafening. Lisa Martinez walked through the Valiant's corridors and saw ghosts everywhere. Empty stations where her crew had stood. Quiet rooms where voices should have been. The ship had left Earth with 400 people aboard. Now barely half remained. The others were gone, consumed by a war that had lasted only 6 weeks but felt like a lifetime. She found Dan Cooper in Engineering Bay 3, staring at a scorch mark on the wall. You okay? She asked, knowing the answer. No, Dan said honestly. This is where Tony Garcia died. A hull breach got him while he was trying to repair the railgun circuits. I was 20 feet away and couldn't help him. Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. You kept this ship flying. You kept us all alive. Tony would say you did your job. Maybe, Dan replied. But I still hear them sometimes. All the people we lost. Do you think it gets easier? I hope not, Lisa said quietly. The day we stop feeling their deaths is the day we stop being human. Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of the Atlas and looked at the casualty reports. The numbers were brutal. Of the 12 human ships that had come to Orion Nebula, only 4 remained operational. The Valiant was heavily damaged but intact. His Atlas had survived. 2 frigates, the Phoenix and the Defiant, had limped back to the rally point. The others were gone, 8 ships destroyed. 3,000 people had volunteered for this mission. Less than 1,500 were coming home. The losses were staggering, but they had saved the galaxy. That had to count for something. Admiral Zethrak called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. For the first time in thousands of years, the council met not to debate or plan, but to thank someone. Representatives from 100 species gathered virtually, their holographic forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Commander Morrison, Zethrak began, your species came when we asked for help. You fought when others wanted to retreat. You sacrificed when victory seemed impossible. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request that Earth be granted full membership, with all rights and privileges that come with it. Kyle stood before the council with Lisa and Dan beside him. He wore his dress uniform, but it felt wrong. Uniforms were for ceremony. This wasn't a ceremony. This was a funeral for everyone who didn't make it home. We appreciate the offer, Kyle said carefully, but we didn't come here for council membership. We came because you needed help. Because the swarm threatened everyone, including Earth. We did what any decent species would do. We stood up and fought. Eshtar spoke next. Her crystalline form glowed brighter than before, as if the swarm's defeat had restored some of her light. You did more than fight, Commander. You taught us something we had forgotten. Courage, determination, the will to sacrifice for others. These are not common traits in the galaxy anymore. But they should be. Kyle looked at the assembled species. Some had been fighting the swarm for years. Others had lost entire worlds. They were all survivors, clinging to life because a handful of humans had been crazy enough to try what everyone else thought was impossible. Then don't honor us with membership, Kyle said. Honor the people who died. Jake Henderson, Greg Turner, Chris Palmer, Beth Larson, Alex White, Kevin Price, Sarah Mills, Tony Garcia, and hundreds more whose names deserve to be remembered. They gave their lives so all of you could keep yours. Don't forget them. The council agreed unanimously. A memorial would be built at the Orion Nebula. The names of every human who died there would be carved in crystal that would last for millennia. Future generations would know what happened here. They would know that when the galaxy faced extinction, humanity answered the call. But memorials were for later. First, they had to go home. The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks. The damaged ships moved slowly, nursing failing engines and patched hulls. Lisa used the time to write letters. She wrote to Jake Henderson's mother, telling her that her son had died a hero. She wrote to Sam Rivers' family, explaining how brave he had been at the end. She wrote to the families of every person under her command who hadn't made it home. Each letter was harder than the last. What do you say to someone whose child, spouse, or sibling died under your command? How do you explain that their sacrifice mattered when it couldn't bring them back? Amy Brooks found her in her quarters one night, surrounded by half-written letters. You can't take responsibility for all of them, Amy said gently. They were my crew, Lisa replied. My responsibility. If I had made different decisions, maybe some of them would still be alive. Or maybe you'd all be dead, Amy countered. You made the best choices you could with the information you had. That's all any commander can do. Lisa knew Amy was right intellectually, but emotionally she couldn't shake the guilt. She had survived when so many others hadn't. That felt wrong somehow. Dan spent the journey making repairs. The Valiant would fly again, but it would never be the same. Too much damage, too many systems held together with patches and prayers. The ship had earned its retirement. After they got home, the Valiant would be decommissioned and turned into a museum. Future generations could walk its corridors and see where history was made. The thought made Dan sad. This ship had been his home for 5 years. He knew every pipe, every circuit, every quirk of its systems. Letting it go felt like losing a friend. Earth appeared on their view screens 2 weeks after the swarm's defeat. The blue planet looked the same as when they left. Green continents. White clouds. Peaceful and safe because of what they had done 8 light years away. Home, Lisa whispered. She had wondered if she would ever see it again. Earth Defense Command had prepared a reception. Crowds lined the spaceport. Flags waved. Music played. People cheered as the 4 battered ships landed. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow. Kyle stepped off the Atlas and was immediately swarmed by officials and media. Everyone wanted to hear the story. Everyone wanted to congratulate him. He smiled and shook hands and said the right things. But inside, he just felt tired. Lisa avoided the crowds. She slipped out a side entrance with Dan and Amy, and they caught a transport to the military cemetery. It was quiet there, peaceful. They stood at the memorial wall where new names were being carved. Jake Henderson, Greg Turner, Sam Rivers, all the others. Think they knew? Amy asked. That they were saving the galaxy? I think they knew they were saving people, Lisa said. That was enough. The formal ceremony came 3 days later. Earth's leadership had organized a memorial service at the newly built Heroes Plaza. The wall there stretched for 100 meters, carved with the names of every person who died at Orion Nebula. Kyle was asked to give a speech. He stood before the wall looking at all those names and felt the weight of their sacrifice. We came here to honor heroes, he began, but I want to tell you who these people really were. They weren't superheroes or mythical warriors. They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Jake Henderson was a pilot who loved bad jokes and good coffee. Greg Turner was an engineer who worried about his sister's wedding. Sam Rivers collected old music and dreamed of opening a bar when he retired. These weren't gods. They were humans. People like you and me. He paused, looking at the crowd. Thousands had gathered. Family members of the fallen, veterans, civilians who wanted to pay respects. They died because someone had to stand up to the swarm. Someone had to fight when others wanted to run. And they chose to be that someone, not because they were fearless. They were scared, but they fought anyway. That's what makes them heroes. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. Lisa stood beside him. When Kyle finished, she stepped forward. The Galactic Council offered us membership and rewards. We turned them down. Because the greatest reward isn't honor or glory. It's knowing that because of what we did, billions of people across the galaxy are alive today. Children will grow up. Families will stay together. Civilizations will endure. That's what Jake and Greg and Sam and all the others died for. Not for medals. For life itself. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence. Thousands of people stood quietly, heads bowed, remembering those who had fallen. Lisa looked at the names carved in crystal and made a promise. She would never forget. None of them would. Months passed. The 4 surviving ships were decommissioned. The crew scattered, some staying in the military, others returning to civilian life. Earth's government debated whether to accept the Council's membership offer. Politicians argued back and forth about humanity's role in galactic affairs. Lisa retired from active service. She couldn't command anymore. Too many ghosts. Instead, she became an instructor at the military academy, teaching new officers about tactics and leadership. She made sure every student learned the names of those who fell at Orion Nebula. They would be remembered as long as she drew breath. Dan took a job designing new ships. Earth was building a proper fleet now, preparing for the day when the galaxy might need their help again. He made sure every new vessel had mechanical backups and simple weapons systems. The lessons of the swarm wouldn't be forgotten. Kyle stayed in command. Someone had to rebuild Earth's defense forces. Someone had to maintain the relationship with the Galactic Council. It was exhausting work, but he owed it to everyone who died to make sure their sacrifice meant something. Amy became Kyle's second in command. Together,